Greetings, students. So this is going to be a unusual or different maybe activity, but I think it was so important for us to take a little bit of time to talk about the talk, right? We've jumped into talking about adolescence and puberty and all of the hormonal and physical changes that are going on in our bodies during that time. We'll continue next week talking about emerging adulthood, and we'll talk a lot more about relationships. And your sex life definitely comes into play when we talk about relationships. But I want to spend a little bit of time focusing on having the talk. So this can relate to the talk that your caregivers or parents did or did not have with you, or if you already have children and they're of appropriate ages, have you already had the talk with them? And I'm just going to kind of walk you through my maybe guidelines or suggestions on some of the things you should be covering and how important it is to tackle this topic that, again, parents don't want to tackle. Right? And I think a big reason that as a society we don't want to tackle this topic is because somehow we think it's taboo to use words like penis, vagina, orgasm, different things like that. I think somehow we think that those are like behind the doors conversation, and we shouldn't be talking about them, right? Like somehow, if you don't talk about it, your kids won't know about it. And so I'm gonna say from the get-go that this video or conversation might make some of you uncomfortable. In no way am I apologizing for that, because I think that we need to get to this place where we understand words like vagina and penis are the anatomical appropriate words for our body parts that all of us, male or female, have. So they're not bad words. I think what happens is if we have a situation where our child says that word and then we say, oh no, we don't say that, you're now teaching your child that there's something wrong with that word or with having that conversation. And that's not what you want to do. You want your child to talk to you about these things, because if it's not you, it is going to be their friends at school. It's going to be somebody else. And as a parent, I think it's so important that you have this chance to instill your values and what you want your child to learn about this topic. So I'm going to say that probably by the age of 10, you should have the talk with your child. And for me, 10 seems rather young. However, the purpose of choosing that age would be that you want to beat the school, right? So come to be fifth grade, public schools or most schools will be having a talk with your children about sex. And so I really feel like as a parent, you want to beat that conversation, because you want to be the one that talks to your child about that, not the school. And in fourth grade, typically the school will do kind of a hygiene, maybe conversation with your kids. And then in fifth grade, it will actually be the talk about sex. And then it'll continue on. In junior high, your kids will even have more information thrown at them. So I'm really going to say by fifth grade, I'm even going to say 14, because my youngest child, I went to have the talk with her when she was in fifth grade at 10, and she had actually already learned about sex in fourth grade. I was devastated because I had planned the whole thing. So this is what I do. When I'm going to have the talk with one of my kids, I make it like a really big event. So my child gets to pick where they want to go eat, because we're going to have this really fun conversation at their favorite place, right? My son chose Hometown Buffet, right? I think my youngest daughter chose Round Table Pizza, right? Whatever it is, I typically have some type of books or visual material. So American Girl makes a really good book for girls. There's a couple of different books out there for boys. And I think that your kids need some visual aids, because I think trying to communicate all of this information to, again, remember where their mind is cognitively at this age. It's not fully developed for sure. And so I think visual aids help a lot. And we're going to have the conversation about sex and about our bodies. And this is the time that I'm going to instill my values in my kids, and you should be doing the same thing. So this is a time that you can teach your children about respecting boys and girls, right? About respecting their bodies. You can teach them about things that make them feel uncomfortable, that they need to share that with you, right? You can teach them about, again, how you feel about sex. What are your either cultural or religious values that go around that? If you're going to teach your kids to be abstinent and that they should be saving sex until marriage, you need to explain why. Because telling young people, just don't do it, isn't enough, right? There needs to be a reasoning. They need to have an understanding. If that's one of your values, there's no judgment there, but your kids need more than just don't do it, because it's not really going to work. Right? So again, whether those values are cultural or religious, you want to be able to share them, and you should be able to share them, right? We want to teach our kids that their bodies are beautiful and wonderful and sacred, and have them to have self-esteem, because we talked about during this adolescent stage, self-esteem is down. Kids feel peer pressure, they feel materialism, they're feeling all these things, and so we want to teach them to value themselves. And so we want to use, again, the correct words and anatomical parts, right? So we should be using penis and vagina and, all these different things and what that means. I think especially if you have boys, it's important to talk about a couple other things, right? So we know that for boys, puberty will start at their first ejaculation, not their first erection, because boys have erections when they're 4 years old, right? When I remember when my son, would make a big thing about getting his first erection, right? And again, we want to make sure that when they're young and they're playing with themselves, that's not wrong. There's nothing wrong with that, right? We don't want them doing that in public. We can explain that, but you don't want to teach their child that being interested and curious about why their body reacts in a certain way is wrong, because it's not wrong. But for boys in particular, I think you need to have the conversation with them about masturbation, about their first wet dream. Can you imagine if you're an 11, 12-year-old boy and no one's ever had this conversation with you, and then you have a wet dream, right? And what do you do with the sheets? And what is this? And is this normal? Is there something wrong with me? Can you imagine all of the thoughts that might occur to a young boy who's experiencing that? And that's why I think, again, as parents, we're going to be doing a disservice to our kids if we don't have that conversation. Yes, I know many of you don't want to. Many of you, it's uncomfortable. Many of you, your parents never did it, or your parents like mine. I think I was 17 when my parents had the conversation with me, and it was really awkward and uncomfortable, right? I had already learned years before. And so, again, not a good idea. You don't want to wait, and you want to have all the information, and you don't want to be so general that they walk away going, I'm not quite sure what they said. You want to be there for questions. You want to have an interactive conversation with your kids. So I make it a really big special deal. We sit down, I'm going to talk about our body parts and how special we are. And then we're going to talk about the purpose of sex, right? And again, this is where I'm going to talk about my values about sex. And as we saw in some of our PowerPoint slides this week, there's some reasons that I really would caution your children getting involved with sex at young ages. And the reason is because there's an emotional component tied to sex. It's not a purely physical act. And so I'm going to say that young people who are 14, 13, 12, all those different ages are not really ready emotionally for the feelings that come along with having sex. And that's why we need to have this conversation with our kids. If that's what you want, then we're going to talk to them about why they shouldn't be engaging in sex at those young ages, right? And again, if you want them to even wait longer, then we need to, again, have conversations about why. You just don't want to say things like, don't do it. For boys, again, if you're going to talk to them about waiting until they're in love, or waiting till they're, have a long-term relationship, or waiting until marriage, whatever it is, then you're going to have to talk to them about masturbation, because how do you think that they're going to deal with the physical reaction that the body has? It's a physical chemical reaction. And so you need to kind of give them permission, per se, to understand that masturbation would be something that they would kind of even expect or go to, and when and where we would do that type of a thing, right? But I think not talking about it, again, makes it sound like there's something wrong with the word, and there's something wrong with the act of masturbation, and there's not. And so, again, some of you are like probably freaking out. You're like, oh my gosh, I could never do this, but you can. And we need to. We really, really do. And I sat down with my youngest daughter. She was 10, fifth grade. We go to have the talk, and she says, oh, Mom, I already know about this. And I was devastated. I had everything planned out. This was my youngest. This was my baby. So this was the last time I was going to do it. And so I was super bummed. So I had her tell me what she thought it was, because I want to make sure she has the correct information, right? And so I had her tell me what she understood about sex, right? And then I clarified some things, and I made sure that, yes, this is correct. This is what it is. And she says to me, oh, Mom, I'm so bummed. I thought you were going to tell me there was a different way to make a baby. She was really grossed out. I know she'll change her feelings about that as she ages. But it was good that we had this conversation. When I had the conversation with my son, again, boys mature a little bit later than girls do. I could see that some of the information was going over his head, right? He was getting some of the things I was talking about. So what that means is that we need to have a continuous conversation. I talk to some parents and they'll tell me, oh, I'm so proud of us because we sat our son down and we had the talk. I'm like, okay, so when was that? That was like 2 years ago we had the talk. Have you had any conversation about it since? No, we didn't though. We had the talk. Well, that's not what we want. I don't want you to think that having the talk is a one-time event, because what it is kind of like having the talk is the jumping off point to a conversation for the next, hopefully, 8 or plus years, right? You want your child to be continuing to have that conversation with you. And so that's what it is. So after my son and I had that conversation, I made sure to continue to, just mention things or give him opportunities where he could then ask a question. And I remember it was about a year later, he came back to me and he was like saying, oh, so now Mom, I understand what you were talking about when you were talking about, wet dreams and stuff. I kind of get what that means, but at the time I really didn't understand, right? So he felt comfortable enough to come back and talk with me about this, right? And we need to, again, make those things comfortable for our kids, not make a huge deal about washing sheets or things of that nature. Again, this goes contrary to what a lot of us, how we were raised, because I was raised in a very conservative home. And so again, my parents were not going to tackle the topic of sex until I'm almost leaving the house. And we just weren't going to have any conversations around your physical body, about what's right and what's wrong, and all of those things. And so we almost as adults have to retrain ourselves to understand that it's better for my child to have this information, and it strengthens our relationship if they know I provided them with that information. I wasn't hiding it. I wasn't making it sound bad or nasty or any of those things. I was giving them accurate information. So we want to make sure to do that. But again, it's not a one-time conversation. It should be something that's ongoing. Right? So I have this girlfriend, and this girlfriend is really outgoing, and she's super funny, and she makes me laugh. And she's telling me that she has 2 teenage daughters, 15 and 17 years old. And she wants to make sure that they keep having conversations about sex or about what's going on in their life, their love life, I should say. And so she was telling me that one time in the morning, she came down for breakfast, and her 2 daughters were sitting at the kitchen table there. And she comes down in the morning, and she says to them, she goes, oh my gosh, I'm like so exhausted. I didn't sleep at all last night. I am so worn out. Your dad was riding me like a stallion all night long. Oh my gosh, I'm so tired. Okay, her daughters are like freaking out. They're like, oh my God, Mom, I don't want to hear that. That's disgusting. I don't want to hear about you and Dad having sex, right? Okay, there's 2 reasons that my girlfriend does this type of a thing, right? One reason is because, number one, I think that she wants to make sure that, hey, if I'm going to talk to you about my sex life, I want you to talk to me about yours, right? This is not something that we should be, again, hiding behind back doors all the time. Me and your dad have sex. There's a reason you're here. We conceived you, right? You may not want to think about us having sex all the time, but it happens, right? And 20 years down the road, we're still having sex. And so I think the second reason my girlfriend does this is because she wants to demonstrate and show to her daughters what a healthy sex life within marriage looks like. Because think about it. How many of us had that example? I didn't. My parents, I never saw that. We never talked about it. It's kind of like, yes, I know they conceived me, but I kind of didn't think they had sex after that. Well, we need to show our kids that sex within marriage is phenomenal. And it's great. And there's nothing to be hidden in any way. Because, again, our media does a really good job, unfortunately, of painting the picture of infidelity and affairs and all of these different types of things. We don't see a lot of pictures of great sex within marriage. And so it's almost like it's a characteristic and a trait we need to demonstrate and show and talk about to our kids, right? There's a really great book called Red Hot Monogamy. And the book is about that if you're in a long-term relationship or a marriage, and you hope and plan to be married for 50 plus years, right? you're going to be having sex with the same person. And so therefore, that monogamous sex relationship should be hot and red. And the book is really good because the book talks about different ideas and different ways that married couples can communicate to their kids what a healthy sex life looks like. And one of the ways they talk about is that, when your kids are toddlers and they're small, that of course, as couples, we'll talk a little bit more next week, but as couples, we should be having date nights. Date nights are very important, or date lunches or date breakfasts, whatever it be. And they were talking about a couple that every Thursday night, they would hire a babysitter to come to the house and watch their toddlers. And they would go into their bedroom and they would have this phenomenal dinner. And basically they'd have sex in their bedroom. And they would put this little door hanger on the doorknob that would say, do not disturb, it's date night, all hearts and lovey. Well, as their kids got older, they get into 5th grade, they get into junior high, they started to realize, oh my gosh, you guys were having sex behind that door, like on Thursday nights, right? Yes, we were. We are still doing that, right? Except we don't have to do the door knocker anyway. We not tell you, don't bother us because we're having sex, right? And so it's like we send these messages to our kids that we're making our sex life a priority in our marriage. And let's be honest, it is a big part of the married life, or any relationship life, I should say. And so we should communicate to our kids in really thoughtful, creative ways that there is sex that's within our relationship and it's healthy and it's good. Because think about it, many of us didn't get that. Many of you, and had relationships where you may have seen your single parent mom go through boyfriend after boyfriend after boyfriend. And, you may have had split parents. You just may have seen things that were very unhealthy, and they're not what you want and not what you desire for your kids, right? And so this is your opportunity to learn. Again, reading books and doing things like this teaches us about how to have healthy relationships. But I think it's so important that we have the talk with our kids. Yes, parents, you need to have the talk and then continue with this open door, two-way communication with your kids. And so for this assignment or this activity, again, I want you to kind of just reflect on and talk about, how did you learn about sex? Right? You may have learned about it in a really, really negative way, right? Unfortunately, like my foster daughter, or like other young people who were sexually abused at young ages. And, they learn about sex in a very unhealthy way. And that does lead to some issues that we could, discuss later on about how they view sex. And so what happened for you? How did you learn about it? Again, if you do have kids, have you already had that talk? Are you preparing for the talk? How's that going? Or if you don't have kids, you have toddlers, young ones, what are you thinking about for the future and having those conversations with your kids? Like I said, next week we will be jumping into emerging adulthood, and we'll be talking a lot more about relationships, and you'll learn about your love language, and we'll learn about maybe some pitfalls or some challenges that we want to avoid in continuing or having healthy relationships. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I really felt that the topic of sex in general is so important. It's important for us in communicating it to our kids, and it's important for us in our relationships now. And so let's give some points, if you say, or an assignment focused totally on sex. And in addition, this is a time, again, for you to ask any questions that you might have of me that you might be able, that I might be able to answer for you. In no means by any regard am I a sex therapist or anything of that nature. But I do understand the psychology behind it within relationships and the importance of it within the family and in communicating that with our kids and so forth. So again, you will be sharing out your experience in learning about sex and also in your future plans for how you might want to communicate that with your children down the road or with your partner currently right now, if there's something going on. And maybe, we tend to be very much thinking that the word sex or that sex is a product-based process. In other words, when we think of the word sex, we think of, did you come? Did you have an orgasm? We think that it's like almost like the epitome of, was it successful based on whether or not there was an orgasm? And that's really not the case. Sex is really process-based, which means that it should be more about what we're learning and discovering about our partner instead of thinking fully on the end result, which is where we kind of get hung up. and we start to get these feelings of inadequacy or insecurity. And we tend to not talk to our partners about what pleases us or what we want. And the more in tune with your partner you are, the more in tune with yourself you are, the more able you are to do that. And so again, I think it's important for us to examine all these different types of things. And again, for some of you, this topic may be really uncomfortable, something you don't want to tackle. However, in particular, you and your partner are going to have these conversations. And definitely, if you want to have children, you need to kind of get over it so that you can have these really good conversations with your kids, teaching them what healthy sex looks like.